Hello, hi, welcome to another booktube video. In this video, I'm going to be talking about my reading experience with The Professor by Charlotte Brontë. So this is the 6th Brontë novel I've read, the 3rd of Charlotte's. I've only got Villette to go. This, I felt like I had to get it out of the way, and I'm kind of glad I did because this is dry and a bit of a hard read. I can't really put it into the words, but I can see how it was rejected by publishers in the day. But I'm also really confused that this was written maybe a year or so before Jane Eyre, because they are completely different. But let's discuss. So one thing that may not come as a surprise to any fan of a Brontë novel is the use of language. And there is some beautiful language in The Professor, some great descriptive prose as well. And there's a bit which is describing some students hiding under their desks, the lids of their desks, and then reappearing, and comparing that to an eclipse, which I thought was great. There's also some other beautiful language, and it's really interesting to see the insight of Charlotte trying to portray a male protagonist in the first person. And there's a bit which talks about women as dolls. So Charlotte writes, "The idea of marrying a doll or a fool was always abhorrent to me. I know that a pretty doll, a fair fool, might do well enough for the honeymoon, but when passion called, how dreadful to find a lump of wax and wood laid in my bosom, a half-idiot clasped in my arms, and to remember that I had made of this my equal, nay, my idol, and to know that I must pass the rest of my dreary life with a creature incapable of understanding what I said, of appreciating what I thought, or of sympathising with what I felt." So I find this really interesting because obviously we are used to the Brontes, especially Charlotte Brontë, with her female heroines. And here we have her attempt at using a male as the hero, if you like. Although what I find difficult about The Professor is not a lot happens. And I think this is probably what the problem was, having a read through the introduction, with what the publishers thought. You know, Charlotte wanted to portray her hero as someone who didn't get given something in life, wasn't left an inheritance, found themselves in some lucky situation. She wanted to portray someone who worked hard and reaped the rewards from that. The trouble with that is, it's a bit too real. We escape to books for a bit of escapism. I know, especially I do, and that's why I like Victorian literature, because it takes me to a time that I haven't lived, that I really enjoy. But yeah, in this, it's just someone who, they do have a bit of a tough life, and I think we see that portrayed in other Brontë novels, especially Jane Eyre. We have the heroine there who has a tough childhood. Same for William Crimsworth here in The Professor. But then he goes through life and he works hard and he gets married. And then, they make a bit of a success. And it's okay. But it's not more than 3 stars for me, just because nothing really happens. And I found myself just a little bit bored. But I did finish it. That's one thing. It is the first time I thought, God, can I finish this? But I did at least finish it. Like many a Brontë novel, religion comes up quite a lot. Although in The Professor, I found it maybe a bit more strict in the way it approached Protestantism and Catholicism. It's very, I don't know if I say offensive against Catholics, but it's very much, you're very much aware that the viewpoint of the characters is that Catholicism is bad and Protestantism is the only way forward. But it's interesting to see that. It's also interesting how Brontë explores the master and servant relationship between William Crimsworth and his future wife. Slightly disturbing to me, as this was her teacher and pupil, and we see teacher and pupil become man and wife. But throughout the whole thing, we still have master and servant. And slightly uncomfortable the way she still refers to him even after they're married, and the way she acts around him. And I guess Brontë was trying to portray this happy tale of 2 people that met, fell in love, and worked hard for what they got. That's great, but not very exciting. And considering this was written maybe a year before Jane Eyre, and in Jane Eyre we had a bit of fantastical. We had, a strong female character who, wasn't subservient to any man, who had her own thoughts, her own strengths. And yeah, she fell into a very lucky situation in the end. She went through a lot of drama, which is lacking from the Professor. So to feel that this came from the same pen and only, maybe a year apart, it's mind-blowing. But maybe Charlotte did think, well, this was my attempt at, writing realism. If you want fantasy, if that's what you want some big old story, I'll give you a big old story. And that's how we got Jane Eyre, Shirley and Villette. I guess it's quite interesting also to see how Brontë deals with the male protagonist, given that the rest of her novels all deal with female characters. Jane Eyre, Lucy Snow, and Shirley, not Shirley, the other main character in Shirley, even though Shirley is a character in Shirley. So yeah, it's interesting to see her take on this, but I don't know personally if she gives her gender away slightly. We see William Crimsworth maybe a little bit emotional when he gets a bit jilted by this, woman he falls for and discovers that she's almost been playing him slightly and she's actually fianced to someone else, his employer. And we see how he, is emotionally affected by that slightly. And to me, I suppose I've got hindsight because I know the writer is Charlotte Brontë. But at the time, I guess it would have been Currer Bell. Although, because the Professor was released after her death, I'm guessing that people would have known at the time. But when Charlotte was writing the Professor, I'm guessing when she was trying to get it published in the first place, it was under Currer Bell, so it was done under this androgynous pseudonym. But for me, I had the hindsight of knowing it was Charlotte Brontë, but it felt, we had some feminine traits coming out in William Crimsworth. But maybe I'm just nitpicking at that. It's quite easy to see as well how the Professor is almost like a starting point for other Charlotte Brontë novels. As I mentioned earlier, we have the young child who believes they have no immediate family, no mother or father, sent away to a boarding school, not feeling very loved, moving to France, well, not to France, to Belgium. So we're getting a bit of Villette there. So I guess the Professor was the starting point. It was the first full-length novel that Charlotte wrote, even though it was the last to be published. And then when she's trying to create something a bit more fantastical, we've got a very similar beginning to Jane Eyre in the Professor. We have bits of Villette in there. And it seems like Charlotte has, used this novel that she created, and then she being told that this isn't going to get published, she's taken the bits that she, the bones, maybe bits of the bones, and then created something even better from that. As I mentioned, with the kind of sexism, the sort of sexism you expect from a Victorian novel, but when you know that the authoress is female, I'm just trying to think, is this Charlotte's attempt to cover her own identity? But it's a bit cringe on top of the master-servant relationship, where near the end they're talking about the marriage, the William Crimsworth and his bride, who was his pupil, Frances. And someone else is in the conversation, Hunsdon, and he says, and the Professor will soon be dissatisfied with the dim light you give. And she asks, will you, monsieur? And she keeps calling him that, and that's also a little bit cringe. And his response, my sight was always too weak to endure a blaze. I suppose you could say, oh yeah, that's him trying to reassure her, but at the same time, no, go out there, go, sing the praises of your woman. Why are you saying, oh, her light will dim? Well, I don't like bright lights anyway. No, that light is never going to dim for me. So yeah, it's things like that are slightly cringe and a bit sort of that master-servant relationship. But I guess we're in a different time. Overall, I don't think I'll be giving the Professor another go. I think once is enough, but I am glad I've read it, and it is an insight into the Brontes in general, especially if you have read their other works. I do still find this kind of mind-blowing that it's the same author as Jane Eyre and only like a year apart. But you can also see how she's used parts of this. This was her, almost her baby, and she's used parts of it. You know, she was told, you know, this is never getting published. So used other parts in other novels and grew something fantastic out of that. So if we didn't have the Professor, who knows, would we have got Jane Eyre? Would we have got Villette? But also if they did publish the Professor, would we have got Jane Eyre then? You know, if Charlotte thought, you know, oh, this is what people like, they've published this is what people want, would she have ever had the idea to create Jane Eyre? I don't know. It's interesting. I'm glad I've read it. Won't go back to it again. Yeah, as I say, it's got the nice language. It's very typically Bronte in terms of the descriptive prose. It's just a shame that not a lot happens. And that's where I found it really hard going. It's bits at the beginning especially, but then a bit in the middle as well. And there were some parts that I really enjoyed where the pace felt like it picked up slightly, but for the most part, I just felt like I wanted more. But that's my take on The Professor. Have you read it? What did you think? I'm going to guess for a lot of people, out of the 7 Bronte novels in total, The Professor for most people is probably going to be 7th. And I think that is the case for me. But if you loved it and you think completely different than me, let me know. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think of The Professor if you've read it? And what am I getting wrong? What am I not seeing with it? Anyway, thanks for watching. Until next time.